start the all right. Welcome everyone to our info session for the publishing certificate with the Chang School. I'm just going to give a couple of more seconds for people to join in, but thank you all for taking the time in and joining for our info session today. My name is Mashrooq Chaudhry, and I'm the manager of recruitment and sales for the Chang School. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the land upon which Toronto Metropolitan University is built. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I want to pay my respects to the Indigenous peoples, elders, and ancestors who stewarded and cared for the nature and people who lived on the land where TMU is located today. At the university, we made a deep and long-lasting commitment to truth and reconciliation. I invite you to learn more about this work online. Now I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's session. Your microphone is muted throughout the event so as not to disturb other attendees or presenters. For the hearing impaired, we have automated captioning available, which you can access by activating it in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions by typing them into the question box of the control panel. And you may send in your questions anytime during the session. We'll be answering them towards the end. Now I'd like to take a moment to introduce our guest speakers for today. We've got Kelvin Kong, who is the academic coordinator of the certificate at the Chang School. We've got Lee Nash, who's a publisher at Assembly Press, as well as program advisory lead at the Chang School, and Julia Harmsworth, a student of the certificate. Now, before we welcome our first presenter, we wanted to do a quick poll for all of our attendees today. And I'll just quickly launch the poll here. We just really want to know to provide feedback to our team. What are your goals and motivations? What motivated you to consider this certificate? We've got 5 options here. First one is career advancement. Second is career change. Third one is skill building for a current role. Fourth, we have personal interest. And lastly is others. Yeah, so we'll leave that up for just about 20 seconds more. And then we'll move on to our presentation from Kelvin. But it looks like I'll end the poll soon. But it looks like career advancement and career change are the top ones. So here are the results. Just keep that on for a bit while I introduce Kelvin Kong. In addition to be the academic coordinator of the certificate, Kelvin is also a production editor here at the Chang School, and he'll be giving us a brief overview of the certificate and how it can help us develop the skills we need, not just to advance your career or a career change, or for personal interest. Welcome, Kelvin.
Great, thanks, Mashroor. Hi everyone. Welcome to the presentation. So the publishing certificate at TMU has been in place for over 30 years now. We are one of the leading publishing programs in Canada, if not the leading program. But I could be biased because I've went through this program as well. We've got our alumni are people who are very well placed in the industry, who are very important in the industry. We have people who have acquired major award winners. We have people who are industry leaders, publishers, organization leaders. I know those terms are repetitive. Anyway, some quick facts about the certificate. Our main method of delivery is online, so it's all asynchronous. Um, so basically, what that means is that you will not be expected to be at your desk at any particular time or day. You have the entire week to go over a week's class, so to speak. It's mainly readings based, and your method assessments are quizzes and assignments and discussion boards. So there's no live video lecture or live participation involved. In terms of certificate requirements, we require 6 full credits to graduate, including 2 required full credits. So one is a trade overview course, which is full credit, which will take you through what the Canadian industry landscape looks like, what publishing is and whatnot, and also the business of book publishing, which will teach you about some business skills and business considerations when working in publishing. Otherwise, there are 4 other credits that are required that are electives, so you can take any course in the program that suits your interests or the direction that you want to head in. Oh, look at that. There's a typo on the screen. It's 2 required and 4 electives, not 6. That's my fault. Um, anyway, as I was saying, yeah, so this is for if you want to commit to a full certificate, if you want to commit to the certificate, if you are here because you want to upgrade your skills or take a couple of editorial courses or maybe take a production course or anything to level up your current career, that's also that's something also you can also do. We are a part-time program, so you are not bound to take the full register for the certificate if you want to take a course or 2 or 3. So in terms of length, we find that most of our students finish the program within 1 to 2 years, but you do have 4 years. As I mentioned earlier, it's a part-time certificate, so we want to be as flexible for you and your other priorities. And the cost is about $7,400 to $8,200 for the entire certificate. The costs do vary if you take any number like most our courses do cost the same if they're full credits, but half credit courses are different in cost. So if you take any combination of those full and half credits, you will end up with different costs. So we give a range there. All right, next please. So yeah, as I mentioned, the certificate requirements to require 39-hour overview courses, the overview of trade publishing and the overview of business and publishing, 4 required elective courses, which can be anything. We find that some people will take all editorial courses, or some people will take production, design, and accessibility if they want to head into digital and book production, digital publishing and book production. We have people who will take like publicity and marketing and sales if they want to head into sales and marketing. Or if if you find that you want to really specialize in say children's literature or children's books, we also have a number of half credit courses that we can take, and you can focus from there. Take a couple of editorial courses, take a bunch of children's publishing courses, and you can work in children. You'll be ready to work in children's publishing. As I mentioned earlier, very briefly, a full credit is 39 hours or 13 weeks. We also have half credit courses, which are more geared towards more specialized things like accessibility or indexing. And those courses are 19 and a half hours or 7 weeks. And again, 2 half credit courses are equivalent to 1 full credit for your requirements. There's also a cumulative grade point average of 1.67 in order to graduate the program. Go on, please. Okay, so industry trends that have popped up in previous years that we have responded to. As you know, audiobook publishing is becoming more and more mainstream. It used to be a kind of a fringe kind of thing where you would buy an audiobook to listen to in the car if you had a car. But nowadays everyone's listening to audiobooks except me because I can't deal with them. But anyway, a lot of other people are. And we launched an audiobook course to meet the rising demand and to really introduce what what audiobook publishing and production is like. It's a 7-week course, so it's a half credit. We also have accessible publishing and production. This is something we launched 2 years ago in response to growing demands for fully accessible books. So this course is for editors and people who work in production to learn skills to make books more accessible for people who have disabilities. And we have digital publishing and production. It's hands-on training for digital publishing. So it's really how an ebook works and it'll give you some of the beginning, some of the building blocks to make ebooks. Next up, please. Okay, so book publishing in Canada. So here are a bunch of numbers. It's basically the 4 different the percent. It's the portion of different formats and genres that Canadian publishing publishes. What you can see from here is that trade publishing, which is basically books that you see in bookstores, that you can buy at Indigo or your local independent bookstore. Those are trade. It's meant for a general audience. So children and youth and adult consumer, those would be trade books. So you can see they take up a majority of the industry. You also have scholarly, professional, and education and other. Those are more academic and scholarly publications and publishing. That field is shrinking, but we still have some very strong pockets of it in Canada. And we have courses for both. Next, please. Great. So our program is not an academic program. It's a professional training program. So our courses are designed to introduce and give you the skills you need to work in publishing or to develop the skills to continue or to build a career in publishing. So we have courses in editing. Our program is probably one of the strongest programs for editing because we have such a wide range of different editing types. Oh God. We have proofreading, copy editing, substantive editing. We have indexing, which no other publishing school has. Which is also a very lucrative niche for those of you who are inclined to work in in indexing. We have courses in sales and marketing and publicity. We have a course in production and a course in book design. So you will learn about design skills and a bit of a start in using InDesign to design a cover and interior text. We have a course on the business of book publishing, which is one of the required courses. We have a course on literary rights management, which is about the buying and selling of intellectual property. That's one of the ones I teach. So, if you do enroll, I hope to see you in my class at some point. We have courses in children's publishing, so marketing and editing children's books, children's classics, and so on. We have a course in editing recipes and cookbooks, which is very specialized and very different from regular copy editing. As I mentioned, we have a course in digital publishing, accessibility, and audiobooks, the digital publishing courses. We have the course on indexing, proofreading, and we had a course on government reports that we probably won't be running this term. So let's say you enroll in the program, you graduate, you wonder what your options are. So of course there's book publishing. So you can work in trade publishing, you work in educational publishing, scholarly reference publishing. Our courses again are designed for the publishing industries. So you can work in any role there after taking our program. There's also freelance editing. A number of our students graduate and become freelance editors. So they don't tie themselves to a house. They prefer to work freelance, maybe from our flexible hours. And then there's also publishing in corporate, government, and nonprofit organizations, and also communication. So there are a lot of non-publishing. There are a lot of roles that aren't in publishers that will use the skills that you learn here. So, for example, banks need people to edit annual reports. There are other organizations that require communications skills, and the skills that you get here are transferable towards those industries. Next one. And oh, well, that's it. If you have any questions, you have our contact information at the bottom of the slide. And if you have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A box and we will answer them. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelvin, for that wonderful presentation. Next, I'm delighted to introduce Lee Nash. Lee is a publisher at Assembly Press, as well as the program advisory lead for the certificate here at the Chang School. Welcome, Lee.
Hello, thanks for having me. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my publishing journey and some of the things I see happening in the industry now, just to give you a on-the-ground look at it. So I've been working in publishing full-time since about 2008, when I started at what is now Thomson Reuters as an editorial research assistant, which is a big title for an entry-level job. I got my first job through a temp agency, and I so wish I had taken a program like this. It would have helped me a lot with acronyms and knowing what people were talking about, and I would not have had to run to my computer and Google things as much. In 2010, I transitioned to working in trade publishing, so the books that you see in bookstores commonly, we call those trade books. And I worked with Coach House Books, and I've also worked as the publisher at Invisible Publishing, House of Anansi Press, and now Assembly Press, which I co-founded in 2023. I've done just about every job in publishing that you can possibly do, which I will say is one of the benefits of working in small press, independent publishing. One thing I can say for certain is that I am never bored. I love the variety that working in publishing offers. It's pretty much ruined me for any other job, I think. One day I'm writing back cover copy. The next day I'm packing boxes to hand sell books at an event. The next day I'm setting print runs. It's a lot of fun. I'm also a poet, though my own writing has taken a backseat. So I come into the industry with the writer perspective as well. And there's a few of us writers in here too. I wanted to talk a little bit about change, because I actually think this is a really exciting time for publishing. There's a lot of opportunity for creativity in the industry right now. Like everywhere else, we're in a period of change. There's, the implications of AI. We're all looking at that and seeing how it's going to affect workflows and writing. Book discoverability, that's a publishing buzzword you'll hear a lot of if you enroll in this course. It's our big to-do. How do people find out about books? We're trying to find new ways of showing people, media gets more segmented. We're moving to Substack from newspapers. It's an interesting time. And of course, tariffs. We're all dealing with tariffs. Publishing is a global industry, which is why I raised that. And I think that's a really important and kind of interesting thing about it. Publishers, we sell print books, we sell rights to publish books internationally, we print internationally. And there's so much more of a focus now on where books are coming from and their environmental impacts. The good news, as Kelvin mentioned, and this program supports, is a rise in different formats like audiobooks. Canada is a real leader in making accessible ebooks, which is really exciting, and is going to be more in demand internationally as accessibility treaties kind of come into effect. But what that tells me is that the demand for books is still strong, and I think that's really exciting. There are so many things you can do with this degree, like here with this certificate. Most skills are transferable, and the thing about this program is that it's so well-rounded that you're positioned to work all kinds of jobs in all kinds of industries. I've already mentioned some of the things that I've done, but freelancing is always an option. The other thing too, because your instructors are coming from Canadian publishing, independent publishing, and multinational publishing, you're also really well positioned to work with professionals from both worlds going forward. They are quite different, which is kind of nice. There's lots of range and choice when you come into publishing, which I hope you all will. It's nice here.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that The perspective about change is I think very important in this climate, and also just giving us all a little peek behind the curtain. So thank you for doing that. Finally, I'm pleased to introduce Julia Harmsworth. Julia is both the student of the certificate and currently serves as managing editorial coordinator at HarperCollins Publishers. Welcome, Julia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Julia, and I'm here to talk a bit about my experience in the program and in publishing. So, as we just heard, right now I work in managing editorial at Harlequin, which is under the broader HarperCollins umbrella. So it's like a really, really big multinational company. And managing editorial, I didn't know that it existed before I found myself there. But what it is it works kind of mostly between editorial and production to make sure that books flow along their schedules well and they hit the printer on time, and we manage any kind of snafus that arise. So we run status meetings, we manage schedules, we do a decent amount of admin, and we're also the point of contact for editors if they need anything. So it's a lot of problem solving and diplomacy, which is kind of fun. Um, but I started this certificate program in September of 2023. So I had just graduated from my undergrad at Queen's in English Lit, and I knew I really wanted to go into publishing, but I was really struggling to break into the industry. I was like applying to every job, every internship, and no one was emailing me back. And I was like, okay, I must be missing something. So I did some good old LinkedIn stalking of the people whose jobs I wanted. And I was like, oh, like these people have all done the TMU publishing certificate. Maybe I should do that. So I signed up for it like pretty much immediately. And after just taking a few courses and adding it to my resume, I immediately got an interview for the internship that I did last year. So I was like, great. Like it worked out very, very well. So then I did an internship Harlequin all of last year, and then I worked on the certificate as I was doing that job. So you can totally do it if you work full time. I did, and I really appreciate that. It was really accessible in that way. And I was able to wrap it up at the end of fall last year. So it took me 16 months to complete. And then just after I finished, I got a full-time permanent job at Harlequin, which I'm in now. I started in January. So the timing worked out really well, which is great. But yeah, I really would recommend this program. I really enjoyed it. I really learned a lot that I use in my job every day. And especially in my internship last year. Like when you're an intern, people assume you know nothing, obviously. So they're like constantly explaining things to you. And then I would be listening, but in the back of my head, I'm like, I know this. I learned this in this course that I just took, which was really cool. And I feel like it gave me a leg up, especially regarding like we said, like acronyms and like all the publishing lingo. Like I knew what launch was and what signatures were and all the stuff that just it just made the learning curve a little easier. And I also appreciated knowing a bit about what each department does, because in man ed I really kind of have my hands everywhere, and so it's really useful to know what everyone else is doing. You can just kind of work with them easier. Um, and I really liked how customizable the program was as well, like how you could learn about so many different things. I'd really recommend the audiobooks course. I thought that was really interesting and really timely, since audiobooks are absolutely the fastest growing format right now. And I think it's really important to know about them. I thought that course was really well done and seemed very applicable to actual work in audiobooks. The literary rights course was super interesting, super engaging, and also the production course made me think about like physically, like all the thought that goes into physically making a book, which is like a really cool thing. um yeah, that is my spiel. I'm happy to answer any questions, happy to chat about my experience in the program or help anyone on their job searches, because I know it's not the most fun. But yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julia, and thank you for sharing the recommendations for the courses. I think for all of our attendees, that's very nice insight. Well, that ends our presentation portion of the info session, and we've got tons of questions, which is amazing. I will dive right into them. So the first question is, I've struggled with pre-recorded online platforms before. Are there tutors or TAs that help with assignments, etc.? So Kelvin, maybe you want to start with that.
We do not, but just to repeat, our courses are not pre-recorded. It's text-based. So you'll be reading everything. There aren't any video sessions. There aren't any live sessions. The only thing, the main thing that resembles participation would be posting and replying on the discussion board. Otherwise, everything is asynchronous. So, every class is a week. So you have the entire week to take in all the materials that you need to that are required. So the readings from the module content, any additional external readings, activities and whatnot, you have the entire week to do it. But no, we don't have TAs or tutors, but if you require any accommodations, we do have an accommodations office that you can contact, and they will liaise with your instructor to let them know what they can do for you.
Awesome, thank you. So next question is from Masuma. Thank you for your question. It's curious about the future prospects of the different areas in publishing that were mentioned. So maybe you can start with that, and maybe Lee can touch on it a little bit as well.
Yeah, I saw that question. I'm wondering about where, what future aspect, the question disappeared. What that aspect meant. Do you mean in terms of future prospects for, gaining employment in publishing? I mean, the thing with publishing is that it is a competitive industry to be in. It's a small industry. There are a number of schools. I think that most people come in wanting to be an editor, and as you can imagine, those are the hardest jobs to come by. Or the roles with the highest amount of turnover, I don't say turnover, but openings, there you go. Openings would probably be sales, marketing, or publicity. Yeah.
Just to say that if you do find a job in one of those openings, though, that can benefit you as an editor down the road as you build sort of an editorial portfolio. Like publishing is kind of a long game career-wise.
Yeah.
More than you kind of walk into a job and you're in it. So that does happen.
Yeah, that is true. I should add, and this is something that I usually say to students in my class who are in the program, or to actual publishing, people who are already publishing students. Basically, if you come into this program and you are you have your mind set on a certain direction you want to be in, do that, but keep your options open. Like Lee said, there's a lot of sideways movement. So, for example, I came into the industry I came to publishing school wanting to be an editor, and quickly discovered maybe that wasn't the best idea. Yeah, won't say much more about that. But anyway, so I ended up working in book production. And through working in production, I ended up working in rights, which again is the selling and buying of intellectual property. And then from there, I went and became a literary agent, which does involve editorial work. So in that way, I found my calling. I also know of people who work in publicity and sales who end up being publishers, which are more of a wide-ranging role that includes editorial and acquisitions. By acquisitions, I mean, buying a book or acquiring a book to be published. I hope that answers your question.
Sweet. Yeah, I think that does. So the next question is from Nelida. Thank you for your question again. How often is the curriculum updated? I noticed in the accessibility course that the book listed was not being printed or sold anymore.
Yeah. Okay. First off, our courses are updated fairly frequently to match any industry requirements, industry needs, any industry trends. But with regard to that specific textbook for the accessibility course, that happened last year. The instructor, Laura Brady, who is an internationally known accessibility expert, she knows about it, and she has made arrangements with the author to provide the book to people taking her course. So that should be fine. But we do keep our courses updated just in general.
Perfect. Thank you for that update. Next question is from Violet, and the question is, what is the success rate of getting hired in any of the roles mentioned after graduating from this course? Any recommendation on which role course to aim for to better the chances of getting through the door when it comes to applying for jobs? Now, I know, there's really no set success rate that you can really mention because, we're not really guaranteeing any of those positions or roles. It really matters. It obviously puts you in a good position, but then it really matters on how you apply and what your efforts are. So I'll go to maybe Julia to start this off because she mentioned that quite a bit during her when she was speaking about what are some of the tips that you would recommend, some LinkedIn stuff that you mentioned earlier. You can start there and we can see if anyone else wants to join after.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say in my own personal experience, I think having a certificate did really help me get a job. I think more than anything, having that shows publishers that you are invested, I think. And now that if there are some people who have it, anyone who doesn't have it, I think it's just kind of it's harder for them to get in the door. They just need more experience, I would say. So I do think it's definitely helpful in terms of strategies of what to apply for. I would recommend, I think Kelvin's definitely right, editorial jobs are the hardest to get, but also if I'm entering the industry, I wouldn't expect to get a permanent full-time job right away. Generally, you need to do an internship first. It doesn't really matter how old you are or what your experiences is. Like now in the industry, that at least at my company, everyone was an intern first, like people who are entering the industry around the same time I did. So I would look at internships. Harlequin or HarperCollins runs them very regularly. They have marketing, editorial, sales, publicity, and ed ones. So just look on the website and I would just apply to any internship postings that come up. Penguin also does them. Penguin ones are shorter, but generally I would just apply for internships, but then also think about maybe your past experience and what branch of publishing that most relates to. Even if you want to be an editor eventually, but you're looking for a foot in the door, if you have background doing graphic design or communication stuff, you can attribute that to marketing and you'd have a better chance of getting a marketing internship. So think about your skill set, your experience, and kind of which department that you can relate that to and prioritize those. But internships, internships, internships.
Yeah, I'll add to that. As Julia said, the certificate is very valuable because one thing to understand is that the publishing industry is small and, we don't have the most resources if you can read between the lines. So when they do hire, they want people who can hit the ground running with the requisite skills to do their jobs. And that's what we provide here. We provide, we're professional training. So we give you the skills to go work in publishing. Yeah, and in terms of what courses to aim for, it's not something we can answer because everyone's going to have you're going to have a different interest from Julia or me or Lee in terms of what your direction is going to be in publishing. So the only thing I can say is that take the courses that you're interested in, but keep your options open. The internships wise, and I see there are a number of questions about internships. So number one, we share jobs and internships on our student community, which you will be part of when you enroll in your courses. So you will be added to it within 2 weeks of your first publishing course. It's a manual process, which I handle. So, if I have to add you, and again, you'll get it within 2 weeks of starting your first publishing course. And there we share job openings and we share internship opportunities. Unlike some of the other schools, internships are not a requirement for graduation in this program because this is a part-time program. And we don't want to have that barrier of, making you do an internship if you have other jobs or other priorities. So, but it is important. So anyway, we post what we hear about or what is sent to us. As Julia mentioned, HarperCollins and Penguin Random House do offer regular annual or biannual internships. So every so often. I think of I can't remember when the HarperCollins and Harlequin ones are, but for Penguin Random House, we will we will share internships around June and November for a 6 month term that starts the month afterwards. Yeah, I hope that answers your questions.
Yeah, no, I think that answers a couple of questions that we had surrounding internships, partnerships with companies for internships, and also, tips for looking for work and job search. So thank you to both you and Julia for that. Next question is from Samantha. She's wondering if there's any book recommendations for insight into publishing.
Should I be the one who says The Perilous Trade? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, the way that we respond seems a bit insider baseball. Okay. So there is a book called The Perilous Trade by Roy McSkimming, and it was published a number of years ago, but it is a survey into the history of Canadian publishing, from before the 1900s up to maybe the early 2000s. And it's a really good look at, how the landscape has shifted, how international forces have affected us, how, what it's like to be a publisher, to work in publishing when you have such a powerhouse to the south as a neighbor. Because I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We do, Canadian publishing does have to compete with American books, and it's very difficult for us. So that book gives a very good history of Canadian publishing in Canada. It's called The Perilous Trade because, well, you'll find out. But there is a running joke that that people in publishing tell. It's how do you make a small fortune in Canadian publishing? You start with a big one. But we're all here because we love books and we love working. We love working with authors. We love sharing stories that people have to tell. So yeah, there are a number of other books that I'll let my other panelists.
The US, I would say pairing to The Perilous Trade is Merchants of Culture,
Yeah.
which is also it kind of looks more at the rise of agents and how they have changed and shaped book publishing, I think. Not in a bad way. I really like The Business of Books by Andre, I can't remember. He founded Pantheon Publishing, but that was a really good read, actually. It was entertaining. And then there's actually a ton of them. There's a PW article. I'll pop it in the chat if PW is Publishers Weekly. Look at that, acronyms. What fun.
Yeah, while Lee's doing that, I would like to make an anti-recommendation. That show Younger does not represent how publishing works. It's a very fun show about publishing, but book publishing does not work like that.
Nothing's like it is on TV.
I can tell you there is an episode about the Frankfurt Book Fair, and the Frankfurt Book Fair does not look like that. The Frankfurt Book Fair does not look like a high school gymnasium. Just saying.
Well, thanks for sharing
But
that.
it is a very fun show to watch, for people in publishing, as well as being Erica, I guess.
Next question is from Anna. It's could you explain the assignment types?
Yeah, our assignments are pretty much hands-on things that resemble what you would do on the job in publishing. So for example, if you take the copy editing courses, you'll be expected to edit documents. If you take a sales and marketing course, you'll be, one of the assignments would be to draft a marketing proposal for a book. If you take my literary rights management course, I would be assigning, how you creating a book and how you would sell rights for it and what your strategies are. For something like the intro to book design, you would be designing a cover and interior text. So it's all it's all skills-based assignments. There's also quizzes, and I think there are 1 or 2 courses where there are exams, but I can tell you the majority of the courses in the program do not have exams. Oh, there's also participation. These are online courses. They are asynchronous, so there's no way for the class to discuss things as a group. So we have discussion boards for them to post to and to reply to other classmates and to the instructor. And for the majority of our courses, those are participation. Those are graded as participation as well.
And it says that the curriculum has undergone some changes recently. Can you touch on the changes?
Yeah, we have taken down our requirements. This program used to require 8 credits to graduate. Now it's 6. Just in response to, the economic realities of that we're in right now. We also changed one of the overview courses. It used to be an educational overview, so it would be an overview into educational publishing. We changed that to the business of book publishing because after a program review, we were recommended to do so because to serve, the industry they need students who understand that publishing is a business and how it works when they come into the workforce. And also because educational publishing in Canada, while it still remains a major presence, is not as it was a few decades ago when the original curriculum was designed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for mentioning those changes. So another question from Anna Sampson, thank you for the question, is does a master's in English help with jobs in publishing or any other masters in addition to this certificate? So I don't know, maybe Lee can start with this one and then you can join in.
Sure. I actually have an MFA, not a master's in English, but I think honestly any degree is additive at this point, and something like an English master's is going to give you sort of that literature baseline, which is always going to be helpful, I think, in the business of books. I don't think it's a requirement, certainly, at all, but I think education is honestly never a bad thing to have. It's my 2 cents.
Kelvin, Julia, anything to add to that?
Uh,
Go ahead, Galvin. I have nothing to add.
Me neither.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question is from Alexis. Thank you for your question. It's any advice for finding work with small press publishers specifically? Is it the same process as internship with large companies, or is it different? And what would you recommend?
I'm gonna let Lee take over after me, but initially my reaction, not to say anything about, anyway, my recommendation would be a small press. Small presses aren't multinationals, so they don't have as many resources as multinationals, so it is harder to find work with them. So if they are posting, if a small press, or I'm gonna say if an independent press does post an job, my advice would be to get to know them as much as possible so that you stand out as someone who understands their list. Because if you understand their list and their mandate, that means you would be more in line with their vision for the press. So if you get the job that they are posting, you will be more attuned to what they're doing and what they're looking for and what they're setting out to do.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is if you're able to go to their events, if you can't afford the books, take them out of the library. We love libraries in publishing. Just get to know them and get to know people. Publishing is still very much a business of relationships and networking, the horrible N word, networking. But, starting out with that, and becoming a known face, it makes it a lot easier for people to say yes to an interview as opposed to just treating you like another piece of paper or online.
Yeah, I second that strongly. Another recommendation to make to my students is to basically be if you are on social media, and note that this is not a requirement for you to be in publishing, but if you are on social media, go follow some publishing people and talk to them. I don't mean ask them for jobs. I don't mean ask them about their company, but talk to them. They have interests just like you and me. So, if you like baseball, Publishing loves baseball. That's one tip I can give you. Almost everyone in publishing, probably except me, I like soccer, loves baseball. So, if you love baseball, talk to publishing people about baseball on social media, and they will hopefully respond to you. And you'll get a conversation going. And really, it becomes like Lee said, it's an initial icebreaker. So if you go to events, you will see people there that you talk to online, and it becomes less of a, oh, nice to meet you, and more of a, oh, hey, it's you. And that really does help.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, and I love soccer too, Kelvin. So we'll talk about that later.
Nice.
Next question, and I think it'll probably need a little bit from all three of you, and that'll probably be the last one that we can take today. Just looking at our time here, is can we get a sort of day-to-day in working in the publishing industry, such as editors or what an internship would look like, and maybe what for a publisher looks like as well. So yeah, maybe Kelvin, you can start, and then we can move to Julia and round it off with Lee.
It's just putting out all the fires. No, the thing about working in publishing is, and you'll find this is especially so with independent presses, is that no 2 days are the same. Um, I don't work in a traditional area of publishing that most people know about, so I'm a literary agent. So, as mentioned, I represent authors and I sell rights to their books to publishers to publish. So, my day to day is pretty much, just answer. It could be like answering, writing and answering a bunch of emails to editors, sending out a submission, and then maybe processing some payments and royalty statements. Royalties being the money that an author makes when a book's published and people buy a crap ton of them. Yeah, so handling those reports, sending money to my author, maybe dealing with a publisher that, about a concern that an author has. I mean, my job does sound like it's all email, but I also do read. I read manuscripts. I read from my clients that we are about to put on a submission, and I give them pointers to how to improve their manuscripts to make it more polished and more saleable. Or I would evaluate a manuscript from someone who is not a client to see, whether they're a good fit for my agency. And twice a year, I fly to Europe, I fly to London, and I go to a book fair and have meetings with other publishers internationally, ostensibly to talk about my books and pitch them, but really it's just a gossip. But but really, I go to book fairs are for trying selling of intellectual property, so I do that. Yeah, and there's also like going to book launches, supporting my authors that way, or maybe getting on a phone with an author to talk about how they're doing with their manuscript, any issues they have, talking them down from a ledge, that kind of thing. So yeah, no 2 days are the same, really.
Yeah, just jumping off of that, I think it really depends, your day-to-day really depends on what aspect of publishing you're working in for sure. But I can kind of speak to my day-to-day in managing editorial, and this would be similar to my internship experience because my internship was also managing editorial. So honestly, I'm doing a lot of the same things. But like on a day-to-day basis, I'd say like 40% of my day I'm doing emails, 40% of my day I'm doing other kinds of admin. So like I process invoices, I do a lot of scheduling and like metadata updates and different things in our systems, like routing files through our content management system, sending files to people, searching for answers to people's questions, stuff like that. And then like 20% of the time I'm in meetings. So these can be with and a lot of these are like bi-weekly standing meetings. Like I have a bi-weekly meeting with with all of my editors to go through all their books on their schedule to make sure everything's progressing nicely. I'm in like a production meeting every other Thursday where ManEd talks production about like this book is running late because of this reason and here's where it is and blah blah blah. Meetings about like bigger projects that we're working on. And I'm also mostly remote, so most of these would be on Teams. But yeah, that's like the corporate publishing perspective.
And what I do day to day is dictated by where I am in sort of the publishing cycle. I think of publishing as it's got sort of this annual rhythm to it where sometimes we're really focused on acquisitions, sometimes it's launch season. So spring and fall are the launch seasons. So we're more likely to be, out at events and doing things at that time of year. When metadata is due to our sales reps, when we're off to the rights fairs to sell rights to things. So day to day really depends on kind of where the rhythm of the industry is at any given time. But yeah, my job is all encompassing. So I do everything from bookkeeping to shipping to editing, which is what I get to do after this. So I'm excited. It's a good day.
Yeah. Oh, and don't forget the grant application part of the year,
Oh, grant applications, also fun.
which involve bookkeeping and creative writing.
That's right.
What you say? Yeah.
That's where my MFA gets used.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge, your insights, and thank you for everyone for taking the time out of your day to attend today's session. We'll put up one last poll here as I make my closing comments. Just want to know how we did. So if we can quickly answer that. If you're interested in learning more or enrolling in our courses related to this certificate, visit continuing.toronto.ca. And if you have any other questions, email us at mash.choudhury@torontomu.ca or at the publishing email and the contact information that I just posted. You will receive a follow-up email with the presentation, the recording of the session, and a survey within 24 to 48 hours. And on behalf of the Chang School, our presenters and guest speakers, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for staying an extra couple of minutes, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.